Namaste, I am Rohit Kumar, your academic counselor, Indira Gandhi National Open University. In previous class, we discussed course content and Unit 1. Today, we will discuss about Unit 2 and Unit 3. Unit 2 name is What is Political Theory? Basic name is What is Political Theory? There are some objectives. Number 1, distinguish political theory from other similar terms. Examine whether political theory is that. Number 3, know various approaches to study political theory. Now, introduction. Political theory is one of the core area in political science. It is only in recent time that it has emerged as an academic discipline. Earlier, those who engaged in enterprises styled themselves as philosophers or scientists. Political theories is the most appropriate term to employ in designating that intellectual traditions, which affirms the possibility of transcending the spheres of immediate practical concerns and viewing man's societal existence from a critical perspective. Political theory was political science in the full sense, and there could be no science without theory. No science without theory. So, political theory may legitimately and accurately be used as synonyms with political science. Now, there are different terms, political theory and other interrelated terms. A distinction can be made between political theory and similar terms like political science, political philosophy, and political thought and political ideology. So, may treat them interchangeably. Political science has tried to provide plausible generalization and laws about politics and political behavior. Political theory reflect upon political phenomenon, process, and institution and on actual political behavior by subjecting it to philosophical or ethical critiques. It's considered the question of the best political order. What is a part of a larger and a more fundamental question, namely the ideal form of life that a human being ought to lead within a larger community. Within a larger community. Now, a classic in political theory has the essential ingredients of a great literary work, which is spite of its local setting, deals with the perennial problems of life and society, is contains the quintessence of internal knowledge, and it is an inherent not of any one culture, place, people, or time, but on the entire humankind. Political theory supplies ideas, concepts, and theories for the purpose of analysis, description, expansion, and criticism, which in turns are incorporated in political science. Now, political philosophy provides general answer to questions such as what is justice in question mark shape. What is justice? Concepts of rights, the distinction between is and ought, and the larger issue of politics. Political philosophy is a part of normative political theory, for it attempts to establish interrelationship between concepts. Now, it is perhaps accurate to say that every political philosopher is a theorist, though every political theorist is not a political philosopher. Is famous quote. Accurate to say that every political philosopher is a theorist, though every political theorist is not a political philosopher, because of political philosophy is a complex activity. Now, what is political thought and different between political thought and political theory? Political thought is the thought of whole community that includes the writing and speeches of articulate sections such as professional politicians, political commentaries, societies, reformers, and ordinary person of a community. Thought can be in the form of political treaties, scholar ideas, scholarly ideas, speeches, government policies, and decisions, and also poem and prose that capture the end use of the people. and use of the thought, it is time bound. For instance, the history of the 20th century, in short, political thoughts includes theories that attempt to explain political behavior, main concern, political behavior and values to evaluate it and method to control it. Now, what is political theory? Firstly, we discuss about political philosophy, then political philosophy, then political thought, and now political theory. Unlike thought, refer to the speculation by a single individual, usually articulated in treatises as models of explanation. It consists of theories of institutions, including that of the state, law, representation, and of election. The mode of inquiry is cooperating and explanatory. Political theory attempts to explain the attitudes and actions arising from ordinary political life and to generalize about them in a particular context. Now we will discuss about political ideology. It is a systematic and all embracing doctrine which attempt to give a complete and universal applicable theory of human nature and society along with a detailed program of attaining it. The 20th century has seen many ideologies like fascism, Nazism, Hitler, Mussolini, communism, and liberalism. There are such political ideology. We will discuss about what is political philosophy, what is political thought, what is political theory, and now political ideology. Political ideology example is fascism, Nazism, communism, and liberalism. According to Gemini and Sabine, political ideology is a negation of political theory. Negation of political theory because an ideology is of recent origin and under the influence of positivism is based on subjective, unverifiable value preferences. According to Gemini and Sabine, political theory is disappointed and disinterested as a science. It is describes political reality without trying to pass judgment. Without trying to pass judgment. Now, as a philosophy is prescribes rule of conduct which will secure a good life for all in this society. Now, development in political theory. There are such development in political theory, how it emerges, basically deal in sense. Development in political theory always reflect the changes which occurs in society. Political theories are produced in response to the challenges which emerge at different times. Hegel, symbolizing characterization of political theory or the all of Minerva takes flight when the shadow of darkness fall in very apt. Famous quote by Hegel. It's a communism theorist, yeah, philosopher. However, we will do well to remember that political thought, which also emerged due to societal changes, and bound by time as well as space, and it is therefore different from theory which breaks such barriers and proves its worth in understanding and explaining political phenomena of different nature and origin. Definition of political theory. What is the definition of political theory? Political theory is defined in different ways by different people. Sabine's well-known definition, Sabine, well-known definition of political theory is that it is something which has characteristically contained factor like the factual, causal, and valuation. Main things is factual, causal, and valuation. Haeckel, political theory is disappointed and disinterested, dispassionate and disinteresting activity. Dispassionate and disinteresting activity. It is a body of philosophical and scientific knowledge which, regardless of when and where it was originally written can increase our understanding of the world in which we live today and we live tomorrow. Main, we will discuss again what is political theory, definition of political theory. Sabine, well-known definition of political theory is that it is a something which has characteristically contain factor like fact, cause, and value. Fact, cause, and value considered by Sabine. And Hacker, political theory is dispassionate and disinterested activity. It is a body of philosophical and scientific knowledge which, regardless of when, where it was originally written, can increase our understanding of the world in which we live today and we live tomorrow. Now, there are some importance of theoretical concept. Importance of key theoretical concept in political theory dead is question mark. Is political theory dead? Is a phenomena in political theory is because political theory is dead. In the middle of the 20th century, many observers readily wrote an obituary of political theory. Some spoke of its decline. Some spoke of its decline. Other proclaimed its death. Question is political theory dead? Some spoke of its decline, and other proclaimed its death. One referred to political theory as being in the doghouse, and described by David Easton. One referred to political theory as being is the doghouse. This dismal view is because the classical tradition is political theory is by and large loaded with value judgment beyond the control of empirical testing. Beyond the empirical testing, the criticism of normative theory came for logical positivist in 1930s and from behavioralism subsequently. Easton contains that since political theory is concerned with some kind of historical form, main concern by Easton contained that since political theory is concerned with some kind of historical form, it had lost its conservative role, constructive role. Basically, lost its constructive role. He blames Dunning, McQueen, and Sabine for historicism in political theory. Basically, David Striston criticized that how to decline of political theory. He criticized Dunning, McQueen, and Sabine for historicism in political theory. Main cause of decline is history of political theory, historism in political theory, given by Dunning, McLean, and Sabine, and criticized by David Stern. The kind of political theory has dissuaded students from a serious study of value theory and rejects elements of history and philosophy in political theory. Stern examined the reason for the decline of political theory in general and its decline into historicism in particular. History is used to endorse exciting values, existing values. History is used to endorse existing values. Secondly, moral relativism is responsible for the attaining a theory received with history. Overall, he gave four reasons for decline of political theory. Eastern major role is historism, and other three reason for is he basically David Easton he gave us four reasons for decline of political theory. Number one is historism. Second is moral relativism. Third is hyperfactualism, meaning factuals, facts, only facts. And fourth is positivism. First is historicism. Second is moral relativism. Third is hyperfactualism, any facts. And four is positivism. Now, revival of political theory. One second. Revival of political theory. First discourse is in political theory dead, and second discourse is revival of political theories, re-emerge of political theories. We can say re-emerge, revival of political theory. In the 1930s, political theory began studies the history of idea with the purpose of defining liberal democratic theory in opposition to the totalitarian tent of communism, fascism, and Nazism. Basically, in uh, Eastern Europe, yeah, basically in West society, communism, fascism, and Nazism basically deal with liberal democratic theory opposed to totalitarian tent of communism, fascism, and Nazism. Loswell tried to establish a scientific political theory with the eventual purpose of controlling human behavior, furthering the aim and direction given by Mariam. Unlike the classical tradition, scientific political theory describes rather than prescribes. Describes, important point is describes rather than prescribes. Political theory is the traditional sense which alive in the works of Theodor Adorno, Marcuse, and Leo Strauss. Their views diametrically differed from the broad idea with American political science. American political science is an institution in America, USA. American political science for they believes in liberal democracy. They believe in democracy not only USA, in Western world. Liberal democracy, science and historical progress, all of them reject political messianism and utopianism in politics. Now, Theodore focused mainly on the uniqueness and responsibility of the human being. The uniqueness and responsibility of the human being, which we see institutes, institutes her criticism in behavioralism. She contended that the behavioral search for uniformities in human nature has uniformities in human nature has only contributed towards stereotype the human being. Strauss reaffirms the importance of classical political theory to remedy the crisis of the modern times. He does not agree with the proposition that all political theory is ideologically in natural mirroring a given socio-economic interest. For most political thinkers are motivated by the possibility of dis- deconcerning the principle of the right order in social existence. A political philosopher has to be preeminently interested in truth. Past philosophers are studies with an eye on coherence and consistency. Now, it's prescribes applied science to be derived from theoretical sciences, but not in the same manner as the classical tradition visualizes. Behaviorism, like positivism, is destructive for its denies knowledge regarding ultimate principles. Their bankruptcy is evident, for they seems helpless, unable to distinguish the right from the wrong. He judged from the unjust in the view of rise of totalitarianism. Strott's counter Eastern's David Easton's charge of historicism by aligning that new science is responsible. Only consider on Strauss. New science is responsible for decline in political theory, not historicism. Yeah, history. Yeah, values. For it's pointed to and obtained the general political crisis of the West because of its over, overall neglect of normative issues. Basically, he claims that Strauss claimed that in West society, in Western world, uh, uh, why the reason is declining in political theory in West world. Basic reason is he declined, he neglect of normative issues, values, basically values, culture, traditions. Okay? Pauline regards political science and political theory as inseparable, and that one is not possible without the others. Now, there are some kind of approaches in political theory how to learn and how to gain political idea, political theory by this approach. Approaches in political theory mainly three different. concepts emerge in political theory on the basis of which both the past and the present theories can be concepts judged and evaluated. They are historical, normative, and empirical. Number one is historical, normative, and empirical. Number one is historical approach. Many theorists have attained theory building on the basic of insights and resources from history. Sabine is one of the main exponents of the historical concept. Basically, main considered by historical approach is Sabine related to Sabine. Sabine is one of the main exponents of the historical concept. In this opinion, a question such as what is the nature of political theory can be answered descriptively. That is how theory has responded to historical events and specific situations. In other words, in this perspective, political theory becomes situation depend in which each historical situation sets a problem, which is taken care of through solution devised by the theory. This conception of political theory is differential to tradition. Cobain also believes that the traditional mode in which a sense of history is inst- instilled to the full in the right way to consider the problem of political theory. It is true that the past act as a valuable guide in our endeavors of theory. Past acts, यानी कि we look in our past and solution, problem, and etc. Basically, history. It is true that the past act as a valuable guide is in our endeavors of theory, building and teach us not to be too sure of our originality. The historical concept also contributes significantly to our normative vision. The history of idea may tell us that our social and political universe is a product of things whose root lies in the past. Basically, we consider approaches in political theory, and first one is historical approach we discuss about, and second one is normative approach. First one is historical approach, and second one is normative approach. The normative conception in political theory is known by the different name. There are some kinds of others name we can consider normative approach. Some people refer to call it philosophical. Normative approach also referred by philosophical theory, with others referred to as ethical theory. यानी कि normative theory approaches by others name. First one is philosophical theory and other one is ethical theory. The normative concept is based on the belief that the world and its events can be interpreted in terms of logic, purpose, and ends with the help of the theorist's intuitions, reasoning, insight, experience. Basically, intuition, reasoning, insights, and experience. And basic mean insight means philosophy. What is philosophy? What is insight in your mind, in your body, in your experience? In other words, it is a project of philosophical speculation about values. The questions which are asked by the normatives would be what should be the end of political institutions? What should inform the relation between the individuals and other social organizations? What arrangement in society can become model of ideal and what rules and principles should govern it? One may say that their concerns are moral and the purpose is to build an ideal type. Hence, it is these theorists who have always conceived utopia in the realm of political ideas through their political imagination. Basically, we consider normative approach and we discuss about there are some name we can know about normative. Number one is philosophical theory, and other is ethical theory, and criticism by is imagination of theorists. Leo Strauss has strongly advocated the case for normative theory and has argued that political things by nature are subject to approval or disapproval, and it is difficult to judge them in any other terms, aspects, and good or bad, and justice or injustice. Basically, Leo Strauss has strongly advocated the case for normative theory and has argued that political things by nature and are subject to approval or disapproval, and it is difficult to judge them in any other terms except as good or bad and justice and injustice. Now, there are some exponents of empirical theory criticize normativism. Empirical theory criticize normativism, normative theory. First point is relatively of values. Basically, normative approach related to values, not facts, values. Scientific theory related to facts and normative theory related to values, value. Second is culture basis of ethics and norms, values, ethics and norms, traditions related to normative approach. Third one is ideological content is the enterprise, and fourth one is abstract and utopian nature of the project. Normative theory criticized by empirical theory, and normative theory basic consider is values, norms, ethics, abstract and utopian nature of project. Now, last approach is empirical approach. Empirical approach against the normative approach. First one is historical approach, second one is normative approach, and third one is empirical approach against the normative approach. What has dominated political theory in the 20th century is not normativism but another concept known as empirical political theory, which drives theories from empirical observation. Empirical observations, empiricals, empiricals Empirical's political theory refused to accord the status of knowledge to those theories which indulge in value judgment. Basically, they criticize normative approach. They focus on values and empirical approach based on scientific method, fact and more fact. Naturally, therefore, normative political theory is debunked as a mere statement of opinion and preferences. They drive for value-free theory, started in order to make the field of political theory scientific and objective, and hence a more reliable guide for action. This new orientation come to be known as positivism. Basically, empirical theory related to positivism, behaviorism. Under the spell of positivism, political theories set out to attain scientific knowledge about political phenomena based on the principle which could be empirical verified and proved. Now, the empirical project is political theory become popular now known as behavioral revolution. Number one is historical approach, second one is normative approach, and third one is empirical approach. Basically, he is this project and empirical project is political theory become popular known as behavioral revolution. This revolution reached and dominant position within political theory in the 1950s and encompassed in the entire field of study and research by advocating new features. They include encouragement to quantitative techniques in analysis. Second one is demolition of normative framework and promotion of empirical research. Basically, demolitions, declines of normative framework and promoting, we can say, criticize of normative framework and promotion of empirical research. Basically, scientific research, factual research. Science is based on fact, and normative empirical approach and behavioral revolution is based on facts, scientific approach, scientific theories, which can be speculated to statistical test. Third one is C, non expectance and rejection of the history of ideas. Basically, historical approach, history of ideas. Focus on micro level. Focus on micro study as it was more amenable to empirical treatment. Glorification of specializations. Basically, deal with specialization, generalizations, procurements of data from the behavior of the individuals, and asked for value-free research. Basically, normative approach related to value research, value approach, values, focus on values, ethical values, philosophical theory, imaginations, insights, reasoning, experience, intuitions, and empirical approach basically deal with scientific research, facts, and value-free research. Now, contemporary approach. There is another is contemporary approach deal with political theory, and we teach us what is political theory. Contemporary political theory made its appearance on the intellectual sense in 1980s and 90s. Mostly, we can say contemporary approach emerged in 1980s and 90s, mostly as a reaction against the established tradition in theory and puts the categories of establishment, enlightenment, like reason and science to which all tradition in political theory were tied. Add to scathing and searching criticism, they brought in many aspects which were concurred as the foundation of truth by political theory. Under the scanner and set out to lay down the new principle to understand and imagine the new social political universe, which some of them put it as postmodern condition. However, it would be arbitrary to yoke the various theoretical trends visuals today under one broad frame of analysis. For example, discussing post-structuralism and postmodernism, which communitarianism and multiculturalism together would account to intellectual advocacy against them and their consent and commitments. The broad trust which brings many of the contemporary theory and theories together could be put under the following. One second. Contemporary political theory opposed to universalism. Basically, we will discuss in post-structuralism, postmodernism, communitarianism, and multiculturalism, multiculture, postmodern approach, post-structure, post-communitarians. Basically, first characteristic of contemporary theories is opposition to universalism. Political theorization in contemporary times has gone for subjecting the universal claims of political theory of yesteryears, irrespective of the tradition to which they belong to critical scrutiny. Liberal universalism has appeared to them as devoid of a social and temporal context. And in their opinion, the hidden particularization, mostly based on the experience of Western society, has as universal value as norms, they argue that the appeal to universal principle is tantamount to standardization. Hence, violation of justice which may be inherent in a particular community or form of the life and which may embody its own values and normative principles. Communitarian theory and multicultural theory in recent time have highlighted in quite forcefully and called this so-called universalist theory and exclusivist at the core, which has always presented one vision of good as the only vision of mankind. One vision of good as the only vision of mankind. And second, critiques of grand narrative. First one is basic criticism, contempt theory, characteristic. First one is opposed to universalizations, yeah, universalism of any idea, concept, theory. and second is critiques of grand narratives. The grand narratives of both the liberal and the Marxist variety has come under the fire or the premise that there is an overreaching or transcendental foundation of reality and truth. Some of the contemporary theory has been declared anti-foundational because of the continuous constitutions of all well accepted foundation in political theory, like state sovereignty and power. In all fairness to them, they do not reject all foundation but only transcendental ones. The post-modernists are in the forefront in attacking the grand narratives, basically grand narratives, and argue that there is nothing like objective pre-given reality or an objective social code which can support such grand narrative and their designs. Now, post-positivism. It is renunciates of the earlier engagement with value neutrality in social science once championed by behaviorism in political theory. The contemporary theories call value-free enterprises as useless and believe that political theory is an inherent normative and political engaged project, which is supported to offer prescriptions and a vision for the future. Now, we will discuss about block 2 concepts, and number 1 concept is unit 3 liberty. Their objectives are we understand different perspectives on liberty and try to know the meaning, justifications, and limits of the notion. Basically, there is objective of liberty, and in this unit number 3, we understand different perspectives on liberty and try to know the meaning, justification, and limits of the notion. Introduction. The idea of liberty as a core principle of liberal thoughts in most commonly understood as absence of restraints. The notion of liberty emerges in the context of the establishment of new socio-economic and political relationships in modern Europe. Basically, in modern Europe. At the basis on the notion was the idea of rational individuals capable of taking reasoned decisions. The rational individual, it was thought, was capable to self-determination. Basically, they claim man is rational. it it was thought was capable of self-determination, in other words capable of taking decisions which concerned his or herself, in order to develop his capacities. The individuals requires freedom from all kinds of social, political, and economic constraints. Thus the idea of liberty as absence of restraints or a space of autonomy of the individual developed. At the same time, however, the fact that within a social organization, the individual is not alone and exists in relation with others individuals require that an equal claims of other individuals to their spheres of autonomy should be recognized in order that the respective claims of all individuals to autonomy can be realized with minimum conflict. It was imperative that a system of restraints and regulation was worked out and adhered to by everyone. The theorist of social contract put forward by philosophers like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau put forth the idea of liberty as absence of constraints. The meanings of liberty, we discuss about meaning of liberty. We are discussing in introduction past part liberty related to absence of restraints, but no society and ultimate right to liberty. Basic meaning, no society individuals have an ultimate, ultimated right to liberty. Each society which have a set of restrictions, there are some restrictions on your liberty, society, community on liberty, which are justified by the fact that people accept these restriction as the best possible condition in which liberty could be maximized. Basic mean is that restriction means is maximize your liberty, your speech, your work process, your liberty. The understanding of liberty as absence of restraints or absence of external constraints as in is generally described as negative. The negative nature of liberty appears in two different senses. Number one is A. In the first, law is seen as the main obstacle to freedom. Basic meaning is the negative nature of liberty appears in two different senses. One is in the first, law is seen as the main obstacle to freedom. Hobbes, for instance, describes freedom as the silence of the law. Freedom as the silence of the laws, such as view sees freedom as limited only by what others deliberately present individual from doing. Now, philosopher like John Locke is a Western philosopher. John Locke have, however, pointed out that a commitment to liberty does not mean that the law should be abolished. Rather, it means that law should be restricted to the protection of one's liberty from encroachment by others. Encroachments by others. Locke suggests, therefore, that law does not restrict liberty; it's rather enlarge and defend it. B. The second view sees liberty as freedom of choice, basically related to freedom. For example, in his works, Capitalism and Freedom 1962, proposed that economic freedom consists of freedom of choice. It is marketplace, the freedom of consumer to choose what to buy, the freedom of to the worker to choose his job or profession, and the freedom of producer to choose what to produce and what to employ. Basically, in three sense: marketplace, freedom of consumer to choose what to buy, and second is the freedom of the worker to choose his job of profession, and the third one is the freedom of producer to choose what to produce and what to employ. To choose implies that the individual can make unhindered and voluntary selection from a range of different options. There are some different options have to you, and you have to choose, and you have to freedom to choice of them. Now, while taking about liberty, is distinction in often made between negative and positive notions of liberty, between the idea of absence of external constraints and the existence of conditions which enable or facilitates. In other words, the distinction between freedom to do something and actually being able to do it. To be free or at liberty to do something in not to restrain or prevent it from doing it. While to be able to do is to have the capacity, financial or otherwise, to do something. The negative conception of liberty is characterized of stands of English political thought represented by Jeremy Bentham, James Mill, John Stuart Mill, Henry Sedgwick, and Herbert Spencer, and the classic and new classical economists who supported the claims of individuals to break free from unnecessary restraints of arbitrary government. The main political axiom, the main political axiom of negative liberty was the everyone knows his own interest best and that the state should not decide the individual's end and purpose. Basically, the state is not a powerful, you are powerful, you have a right to freedom, you have a right to right to work, you had a right to speech, you had right to expression, and your right is above the states. Basically, state and individual society community does not decide the individual's end and purpose. You will decide your opinion, thought, and values. The concept is neutral in the sense that it is compatible with a wide range of politics and describe a condition of liberty without indicating whether it is good or not. But mainly, negative liberty is related to minimal state. Minimal state is basically restricted state. Basically, more power for you, not state. It is called minimal state. John Locke referred to is limited state, minimal state, and John Locke referred to limited state. Criticism of the negative notion of liberty have come from modern liberals, social democrats, and socialists. The liberals in 19th century, primarily T.H. Green and to some extent J.S. Mill, developed some of the earliest critiques of negative freedom and negative liberty. They felt that capitalism had done away with feudal hierarchies and legal restriction, especially of economic pursuits, but it had also subjected large masses of people to poverty, employment, and disease. Such circumstances were seen as hindering liberty as much as legal restraints and social contracts. One of the first liberals to embrace the positive notion of liberty was T.H. Green. Mainly, we will focus about T.H. Green, who defines freedom as the ability of people to make the most and the best of themselves. Basically, T.H. Green described as liberty and freedom, ability of people, and you have abilities, you have courage, you have qualities to make the most and best of themselves. This freedom consists not merely of being left alone, but is having the power to act, shifting attention, thereby to the opportunities available to each individuals. The concept for positive liberty has been at the basis of the welfare state. J.S. Mill notion of liberty. J.S. Mill on liberty was influential and in academic debates in the 1960s. Mill works in scenes as expositions expositions of the negative concept of liberty. At the basis of Mill's arguments for individuals' freedom lay a strong sense of contempt for custom and for legal rules and norms which could not be rationally justified. It is also sometimes argued that Mill any free action, no matter how immoral, has some elements of virtue it is. But the fact that it was freely performed while Mill considers restraint on an individual's action, even he did not consider restraints to be entirely unjustifiable. He felt, however, what within the society there was always a presumption in favor of liberty. Any constraints on liberty, therefore, had to be justified by those and applied them. For Mill, the purpose of liberty was to increase the attainment of individuality. Individuality refers to distinctive and unique character of each human. You have a unique character, you have a unique qualities, you have a unique visions, you have a unique uh, expectations. That's why J.S. Mill characterizes each human individual, and freedom means the realization of the individuality person growth on self-determination. It was the property of individuality in human beings that made them active rather than passive and critical of existing models of social behavior enabling them to refuse to accept conventions unless they were found reasonable. Freedom in one framework, therefore, appears not simply as the absence of restraints but the deliberative cultivations of certain desirable attitudes. It is because of this that Mill is often seen and gravitating towards a positive concept of liberty. Mill's conception of freedom is also rooted in notion of choice. This is evident from the belief that a person who lets others choose his plan of life for him does not display the factually for individuality or self-determination. The only faculty he or she seems to possess was the epicline, faculty of imitations. On the other hand, a person who chooses to plan for himself employs all his faculties. Also, Mill strongly believed in the instrument's value of liberty in promotion of social goods. This is especially true on his argument for complete liberty of thought, decision, and expression, and right to assembly and association. This liberty is considered in our constitution, in Indian constitution. Mill felt that all restrictions on free discussion should be removed because truth would emerge from a free competition of ideas. Now we will discuss major political theorists Isaiah Berlin and the two concept of liberty. In his now classic Two Concept of Liberty, Isaiah Berlin tries to reconcile the negative and positive notion of liberty. The notion of liberty as the absence of restraints with the various view pertain to its operation within the social context. For Berlin, the negative notion of liberty can be understood by addressing the following question: what is the area within which the subject, a person or group of persons, it is or should be left to do or be what is able to be without interference by other persons. On the other hand, the positive sense in concerts with the answer to the question what or who is source of control or interference that can determine someone to do or be this rather than that. Positive liberty, on other hand, does not interpret freedom as simply being left alone by as self-mastery. The theory involves a special theory of the self. The personality is divided in higher and lower self. Basically, your personality is divided in higher and lower self. The higher self is the source of individuals' genuine and rational long-term goals, while the lower self caters to his irrational desires. Higher self related to goodwill, and lower self related to irrational desires, which are short lived and transcends nature. A person is free to extend that higher self, it is command of his lower self. Thus, a person might to be free in the sense of not being restrained by external forces, but remains a slave to irrational appetites and drug addict and alcoholic or a competitive gambler might be said to be unfair. The main feature of this concept it is openly evaluate nature. Its use is specifically tied to ways of life held to be desirable. The idea of positive liberty involves a special interpretations of self and assumes not just that there is a realm of activity towards which the individual ought to direct himself or herself. The notion suggests that the individual is being liberated when he or she is directed towards it. Critics of Berlin notion of positive liberty feel that a belief is political liberty may involve the idea that all other values, equality, right, justice, etc. We will discuss in uh, 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 extended classes. We will discuss in other classes. What is justice, what is right, what is equality, and subordinate to the supreme value of higher liberty. Also, the idea that the higher purpose of the individuals are equivalents of those of collectives such as classes, nations, and race may lead to espousal of totalitarian ideologies. Now, Marxist critiques and the idea of freedom. Marxist would be the notion of liberty based on the liberal notion of individual and society as conditions of unfreedom. For Marxists, the individual is the not separated from other individuals in society by boundaries of autonomous spaces for the free exercise of choice. They are rather bound together in mutual dependence. The notion of individuality is likewise transformed into a notion of rich individuality, which emphasizes that social independence of the individual. The idea that individuals can reach a state of creative excellence and develop their capacities only in society which seem the development of all its members. For the Marxists, therefore, freedom lies in the development of creative individuality and cannot be achieved in a capitalist society where individuals are separated by boundaries of self-interest and where they can only imagine themselves to be free when in reality they are bound by structure of exploitations. It is only in a society which is free from the selfish promotion of private interest that a state of freedom can exist. Freedom thus cannot be achieved in a capitalist society. Basically, Marxist theory criticizes idea of liberal freedom. They criticize freedom cannot be achieved in capitalist society. This view has been articulated in Engels' Anti-During and Karl Marx' Economic and Philosophical Manuscript of 1844. Engels discussed the notion of freedom as a state of transition from necessity to freedom. The state of necessity is defined by the situation in which the individual is subjected to another wills. Engels points out that man has the capacity to identify and understand the forces which condition and determine his life. Marx and Engels in Communist Manifesto, it was only in a communist society where there will be no class exploitation that freedom will be achieved. In uh, in his works, manuscripts, Karl Marx arrives that the capitalist society is dehumanizing. It is not only an individual from his true self, it separated his from the creative influence of society. Marx's purpose that is only by transforming those conditions in which alienation takes place can freedom be restored. Now, other contemporary ideas of liberty. Number one is Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman, like Mill and Berlin, was a liberal who, in his work Capitalism and Freedom, developed a notion of liberty as a significant aspect of capitalist society. The freedom of exchange was an essential aspect of liberty. To promote his freedom, Friedman requires that state to give us its concern for welfare and society security and devote itself to maintaining law and order, protecting property rights, implementing contracts, etc. Now, F.A. Hayek, in his work The Constitution of Liberty, F.A. Hayek has propounded a theory of liberty which emphasizes the negative role of the state. For Hayek, a state of liberty is achieved when the individual is not subject to the arbitrary will of another individual. Hayek called him his this individual freedom and distinguishes it from other forms of freedom. Establish at the same time the primacy and independence of individual liberty from other forms of liberty, including political freedom. Now, Marxist notion of freedom, Eric Fromm, explained that is modern society aloneness was brought about owing to the separation of the individual from his creative capacities and social relations. This separation generated physical and moral aloofness in the individual affecting his mental well-being. It was only thought creating and collective works that the individual could restore himself to society. Now, and is Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse, in his work One Dimensional Man Studies in Ideology or Advanced Industrial Society, also explored the nature of alienation in capitalist society. Marcuse assessed that the creative multidimensional capacities of the individuals get on in capitalist societies. Man is able to express himself only as a consumer, constantly engaged in the satisfaction of his physical needs. Now, thank you so much. We will meet again in next class with some interesting units. Thank you. Namaste.